All righty. Well, welcome, everyone. This is our Honolulu Salesforce nonprofit user group, and we are extremely excited about having Caroline Renard and Reid Hamilton from Data Geeks Lab to talk to us about a use case that they're using the program management module for. And before we begin, I'll start with Caroline and Reid giving a little bit of an introduction, but we wanted to get a sense of where people are at with their PMM program management modules, also called PMM for short, where your knowledge is. Have you ever used PMM before? Is this your first introduction to it? And if you can maybe put in the chat what your experience with PMM is, so we can get a kind of a baseline for our presenters. Okay, some familiarity from Dodi. Oh, okay. Okay. Awesome. Okay. And I'm currently doing an implementation of PMM. So this timing couldn't be better on this topic, because it is not an easy module. It's kind of complicated. So super excited for you, Caroline and Reid, to give us the scoop on, how to manage this thing. So before we begin, Caroline, why don't you start with an introduction about your background with Salesforce and maybe a little bit about your career trajectory and what you're up to now. And then I'll have Reid, you can follow after Caroline is done.
Okay, well, that's great. I have to say we're sort of figuring out a program management module as well as we go, because we've got some clients that we're working on it with. And so I think this is going to be more of a kind of our thought process and things that we've discovered. I have a few slides, but there won't be very many of them. I wanted to let me first of all tell you a little bit about Data Geeks Lab, and then perhaps we can just kind of introduce ourselves. At Data Geeks Lab, we are, we like to call us, we're a team of problem solvers. We're all based in the US. We've all used Salesforce in previous jobs at nonprofits. The company itself is 5 years old, though a lot of us have been in the Salesforce space for longer. We work with a lot of small to medium-sized organizations doing great work in things like conservation, advocacy, social justice, education, and the arts. And we have this little tagline about working with you at all stages of the Salesforce journey, because we don't just do implementations. Many of our clients are relying on us for ongoing support or to help them through organizational changes, including onboarding new staff, for example. And we love helping organizations to try new and slightly different things with Salesforce. We do a lot of coaching and training. And in fact, one of the examples we're going to talk about today is a client who's already has the Nonprofit Success Pack. So they use Salesforce for fundraising, and they came to us to ask if they could expand their use of Salesforce to include managing their programs and also their volunteers. And please take a look at our website if you want to find out more about us. I've been in the Salesforce space since 2009, for a lot of that time working as an independent consultant. My previous career was in the arts as an arts administrator, and so I've kind of specialized. My niche is working with arts organizations who are in the Salesforce space. So I do a lot of work. I was lucky to be taught a lot of the kind of things about the Nonprofit Success Pack by some of the early pioneers. Seattle was a very good place to be when the Nonprofit Success Pack was launched. I also work with a lot of clients who are using a managed package called Patron Manager, which is specifically designed for the performing arts. Reid, do you want to do a quick?
Yeah. So I met Caroline about, I don't know, a little over, 18 months ago, while I was working at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, which is where I began my kind of Salesforce patron manager journey. Back in 2018, I helped them, roll out Salesforce from Razor's Edge. And I'm now a certified Salesforce admin. I'm a nonprofit cloud consultant. And yeah, I've been working with Data Geeks Lab for about 7-8 months now. And it's a pleasure. And I'm really happy to be here. I really enjoy being able to, piece things together that the client gives you and roll out something like, the solution we're going to show you today.
Great, thank you. So, okay, so as I say, there are just a few slides. This is mostly going to be demo. So we're going to offer you a sort of guided tour of the program management module. This is the solution that Salesforce.org offers to manage and track the services and the events that you provide for the clients that you support. This diagram is, I mean, it's kind of helpful if you're going to, more so I think if you want to really dig in. But you'll see that there are a cluster of objects that have program in their label, and there are a cluster of objects that have service. Now, the programs are the programs themselves, and another key one here is the program engagement, which is what connects a program to a contact. So think something like an enrollment or a registration or an application. And then there are these service objects, which are more kind of go into more detail about how the contacts participate in your programs. So services are various elements of the program, and they're delivered to the contacts on a one-time or a repeating basis through these session, delivery, and schedule records. And we'll show you some examples of those. And I think getting your head around the language here is possibly the most difficult part of understanding this module. So we're going to show you some examples today to try and help you with this. But also, if you look up the documentation, and I'll provide a link to that later, they have provided a sort of sample workbook for you, a worksheet where you can go through and map how your programs might fit the labels and the objects here. So as I say, that whole language thing is a big thing. Just a few other quick points before I hand this over. So this module is free. You can install it, try it out, no cost. It doesn't matter how many different, how many licenses you have. And if you're in a P10 organization where your licenses are donated, then you can have program management module for free as well. It's not required that you already have the nonprofit success pack. I mean, I think often the two things are demoed together because they work very well together. But if you're not NPSP users, that doesn't matter. You can install PMM anyway. And I think what we've found is that there are kind of things provided like profiles and permission sets, and there's a whole load of actions and fields. Not all of those are going to be visible when you first start. So it's a really good idea to put it into a sandbox and to experiment, because as you look through the examples, and we found this when we were working through it as well, we go, oh, there's supposed to be something here for this service delivery or whatever, and it probably exists. It's just like it's not immediately configured onto the page layout. So there's probably going to be a little bit of sleuthing and kind of finding out where those actions are and what exists and putting it and making it work for you. There is then a paid add-on, which is called the Nonprofit Cloud Case Management. You'll see that some of those objects exist in the demo org that we've got because it's got case management installed. The case management bit of it is paid for. I think it gives some more features for kind of initial assessments of clients, of matching them to a range of services, that sort of thing. But you can also use Salesforce cases as you get it in your Sales Cloud org or your Service Cloud org. You can configure that to work alongside program management modules. So I think unless you have quite a complex sort of service support, possibly in human services, that's a good thing to consider, the nonprofit cloud case management. But a lot of your programs, you can probably make them work just with the free tools. So I'm going to hand over. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to let Reid show you around a demo org. That is, if I can find, because my buttons keep disappearing. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. Just while Reid is setting up, we're going to show you a demo org that we can get as partners from salesforce.org. So none of the people in this actually exist. We're going to start by showing you some of the stuff that came installed and configured already in the demo when we got it, some of those programs. And then we're going to look at some stuff that we created while we were brainstorming how we were going to help a client. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them into chat. We'll try and answer them as we go along. Otherwise, we'll leave some time for questions at the end, or even just if it's a really burning question and we're not kind of looking too carefully at the chat, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and shout, and we'll try and answer the question for you. Reid, over to you.
All right. Okay, I'll give it a few seconds. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. Okay, so yeah, the first program we're looking at right now is a standard food bank program that you might see in some of your trailhead training or maybe some other Salesforce tutorials. So just some basic defining what's going on. You'll often hear a program is what a nonprofit does. A service is how the nonprofit does it. So this food bank is composed of these three services right now. It delivers food through the food pantry, the mobile food pantry, and the school food program. That's just the basic, I think the most basic structure of the PMM. Now, there is some information over here on the left about the food bank itself, this food bank program. You can see, it is currently active. There's a little brief description that can be provided, who it's targeting, and this description. Maybe it's more in depth about what the program is doing, what the end goal is, and maybe you also have some internal notes about like what you want to be able to report on at the end. I think that's really important because how you want to track the service or the effectiveness of the program will really define for you this unit of measurement over here when you create your services. So because this is a food bank program, the services are delivering food with the unit of measurement in pounds. So we're going to track pounds of food that are delivered to all of our program engagements, all of our clients. So aside from services here, we've got, I think, most important program engagements. These are going to be the folks interacting regularly with your program. They'll be receiving those services. And these records will show you kind of all of the services delivered by this specific program. And then also we've got the program cohort, which is a way, it's like a tool to divvy up your client base. So we've got steps west and steps north. So maybe you have two nonprofit locations for the food bank, the west location and the north, and maybe Abigail receives services at the west location and Joanne receives them at the north location. So that way, at the end of the program or periodically, you could report on the number of services delivered to our west cohort versus our north cohort. All right, so let's take a quick look at one of these services. This is going to be our food pantry service. And we can see, if we move over to the right, we've got this food pantry information about exactly what the service is. Seems like a family can get groceries twice a month. They are receiving their service in pounds, and it's currently active. Here in the related list section in the middle, you can see all of the service deliveries that have been provided so far. This is going to be the record you are going to be basically reporting on when you track the effectiveness of your service. So you can see we've got about maybe 32 pounds of services of food that has been delivered so far to about maybe 4 or 5 people here. All right. So that's kind of your basic service and program combination. And if you wanted to, maybe somebody came into your office while you have your service up, you can create a new service delivery here using that new service delivery button. Find your client, which is going to be a contact. Maybe we're going to add a service to Gennaro here. And one thing we might notice, if we look for Gennaro, he only has one program engagement record, which is really nice to have, but it is not for the food bank program. This is for Gennaro Boyle's wildlife awareness and appreciation engagement. So he's not currently enrolled in the food bank program. We don't have to worry about that right now. We can address that later. We can maybe enroll him afterward. We know he needs the food, and maybe your staff person is just trying to deliver the service. So he's just gonna find the contact, skip over the program engagement. If you are tracking who provides services, you could do that. We're gonna skip that for now. And the quantity, maybe Gennaro today has 5 pounds of food that he's gonna buy. We'll save that. And it's gonna create right over here, your service delivery. And if we pull up, I've got his contact record up here. Now refresh that just to make sure everything's updated. We can see in his services tab that he has received his food pantry food. Okay. And notice that program engagement's black.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? We had a conversation about whether is it really necessary to do the program engagement, but it feels like that's going to be, it's a good thing to have that as a sort of, so you can track the kind of continuation, isn't it, of whether Gennaro comes back again. So
yeah.
We were kind of brainstorming ideas about, you might have a report perhaps that the administrator of the organization has, where a service delivery has been created without program engagements, and make sure to go back and fill in the gaps.
Yeah, for sure. Ruby, you have a question?
Yeah. So I noticed that there's the service participants also.
Yes.
So how does that differ from the program engagement? Like,
yeah, so we will get to in our next kind of program example, where these service participants are created. What that's going to be related to are these ideas of service schedules in service sessions, which is going to be like right now we're doing this food bank, which is like drop in, get your services, you receive your services, maybe it's food, maybe it's counseling, whatever it is, and you leave. Service participants in service schedules are going to be this kind of regimented, weekly, monthly sessions that will, so it will show you all of these kind of classes or events that they have been a part of.
Okay, thanks.
We thought that one of the ways, one of the ways that you can think about it, because these participants are going to have, they're going to have service deliveries as well. But perhaps one of the ways to think about it is who is dictating when the service happens. Because we're looking at an example now where it's kind of the client's choice. They come into the food bank and it creates a service delivery. Whereas the next example we're going to show you is where the organization is creating the time slots and the clients are fitting into them. So it's a kind of slight sort of choice of the timing is one of the ways I think to think about it. Yeah. And I mean, these program engagements, I think if you have somebody who's regularly making use of the services, the program engagement is helpful as that kind of, as the overall record. Here's somebody who is, who's taking advantage of this service on a regular basis.
Yeah, and as you know, Caroline mentioned earlier, kind of the program engagement can kind of track enrollment and maybe application. You see some of that is already built in. So you can see, you know, Abigail applied in January, was accepted or started her services in July, and you know, was only a part of the program for about 3 months. So that is also tracked here. And you've got all of those service deliveries. And because Gennaro, in our example, didn't have that program engagement, he won't have this kind of nice little record that brings everything together. But let's say we wanted to create one for him. We are back on the food program page. We can add contact to program up there at the right, find Gennaro, put him in as active. He is a client, and we can just, you know, we can fill that out. The application date, we probably skip, but the start date and end date, we could fill in, or you could leave that end date blank if it's a ongoing client interaction. Now, one quick thing before we move on to the next section, I did want to show, we did create this little list view. I don't know if you guys love list views as much as me, but I'm on the service deliveries tab, and I've created this list view that shows over here on the right, my filters are program engagement equals blank. So now I know, okay, I've got at least, let's see, 4 folks here who have services delivered to them, but no program engagement records. So, you know, my front desk persons are doing their job. They're focusing on the client and creating these service records, these service deliveries, but they're not entering the program engagement. So as the admin, I can go through and create food pantry engagement records for each one of these 4 clients.
Great. So we'll, just before we move on to the other example, any other questions from anybody about how you might run a program a bit like this? Let's call it a drop-in program.
I just wanted to point out that reports with an underlying report type that is looking for 2 objects is going to miss records. In the example that you gave, if someone doesn't have a program engagement, you really have to be careful of what kind of report type you're starting your report with to get all the records that you're
Very good point. Very good point. And another reason, yeah, it's almost like maybe if you're really going to structure out how you deliver your services, before anybody gets to that checkout counter at the food bank, somebody checks them in and makes sure that program engagement is created already.
And certainly, like you showed, Reid, it's a really good, I think it's a really good discipline to say, let's make sure that that they've been completed afterwards. If not,
yeah.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is you can, there are a bunch of different reports, and you could just be reporting off service deliveries. And it may be that actually for something like this, which is a bit more of a drop-in, maybe program engagements are a bit optional. I mean, there are other things I think where you definitely want to track somebody's progress through, but I suppose the program engagement, having that extra link, would help you to see kind of is another way of sort of grouping things to see how often or how regularly somebody's using the services. So
yeah, and Deb mentioned in the chat, she says record triggered flow, and absolutely.
nice
I think as many times as you can, you know, make this as easy for yourself as an admin as possible is the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so that's so this is as I say, is more like a sort of drop-in service where the client is choosing the time of the delivery and how they interact with you. So now we're going to look at a slightly different example. We are working with an organization that offers a series of training courses to young people. In fact, their sessions are to do with computer code. We actually have turned it into wildlife because we thought that was a bit more interesting. So the sessions all happen on the same days, but they have sufficient participants that they have like a morning group and an afternoon group. So Reid, shall we talk through a little bit how we set that one up and how we thought we'd do it?
Yeah, so let me close these and voila. Yeah, so here's our 2022 Wildlife Awareness and Appreciation Program. I've added some description here about, this is to help cultivate grassroots wildlife conservation in the community. And they're going to do it by teaching them courses. We've got at least 2 courses right now served via the services records of aquatic environments and tropical environments. And maybe we could go through an example of creating one for the last part of the program, which will be the environmental impact humans have on. And so these services are how we are going to teach the community about wildlife conservation, the program engagements. We can click in here and you can see we've got about 115 program engagements here. And how they're divvied up, if I click back to my program, is into cohort blue and cohort red. It's not like region and as in our previous program, because these are more like teams almost, because we can only focus on so many students or clients at once. We've divvied them up into these 2. And one of these, maybe cohort blue and cohort red, will have their courses given and delivered on a separate day. So maybe one's on Saturdays, one's on Sundays. So that's how we've divvied up our client base.
And what's interesting, sorry to interrupt you,
No.
just a moment. What's interesting with the program engagements here is we debated, because this organization has quite a complex application process. And it could be that we could use program engagements for it. I mean, the students have to pass various tests and answer a bunch of questions. In fact, because the organization already has their applications set up with an integration to the tool that they're using, we've decided to kind of leave the applications as they are. But we're creating a process for them that when the application status is marked as awarded, it creates the program engagement record for
Exactly.
them.
Going back to that
And
record triggered flow.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like as soon as the application is awarded, then it's attached to a newly created program engagement where you can deliver those services and begin adding them to these service schedules that we're about to talk about.
Go ahead, talk about the schedule.
All right. So real quick, if I look at the service for aquatic environments education, you'll see that I have 2 service schedules here. The last one didn't have one because it was a drop-in kind of service as you need it. This one is regimented. They're going to meet 3 times over a course of 3 months. They're going to be delivered by Jody Cash. So this record, if I click into it, the service schedule is going to contain all 3 of the classes that will make up the aquatic environments education service. So one service is going to meet on April 2nd, another one on May 7th, and the next final one on June 4th. So that is what the service scheduler tool created for us. And on the left, you can see a bit more information on it. This is really the meat of the service schedule. So this is the name of it. It's for cohort red specifically. So all of the service participants here are part of the red cohort. It's delivering them the aquatic environments education service. It's going to be provided by Jody Cash with the assistance of Karen Park. And you can set like a participant capacity here, maybe if you had a limited class size. And perhaps most importantly, the number of the quantity of the service you're going to provide. So this is where, for the food bank, we had the measurement of pounds. In this case, we're going to have a measurement of hours. So this is going to be 4 hours of aquatic environments education service that is provided to each of our participants for each session. All right. So I'm going to hop into one of our service sessions that our service schedule created. This is going to be our April 2nd session. And you can see here, what makes up the session is the attendance. It's like your classroom roster, right? So after the course is ended and you've gotten your attendance, you can track who is attending, maybe who is absent. And as soon as you submit this session attendance, it creates for you, if I go over to the related list here, all of the service deliveries that you want. These won't be created until after you have submitted your attendance roster. But this is one way you can, create your services in bulk on a regimented schedule, and you can assign it by cohort. And yeah, I think it's a really manageable way to create your service deliveries. And real quick, you can manage and update these after the fact if you wanted to, if you actually realize Haley was absent, you can mark her as an excused absence. The default is going to be present, so it's kind of nice there. It's all you have to focus on are the absences rather than the present attendance.
And yeah, you can also change the hours. I mean, if somebody came late, but they were there for half of it, you could change it to 2 hours or whatever. And this starts to then track back onto their contact record. Yeah, so as well as looking as you just showed, Reid, this idea of how well attended was the class overall, there may be circumstances where you need to know each of the participants track record of attendance as well.
Yeah, and because we created these by cohort, you can also report on your program cohort's attendance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was telling Reid when we were looking at this together yesterday that a few years ago I had to build something all custom built a few years ago for an art therapy group. And we had to spend a whole load of time with a separate form tool tracking the rosters and things. I hope they've converted to program management module now, because they were working with at-risk populations, and it was it was kind of key to them to know who was coming, and that people didn't miss the class too often, because that might be a sign that somebody was in trouble and needed some help. So it was having all of these kind of notifications of people who went there, and as I say, and looking at people's actual individual attendance records was really important for this organization. And as well as all of those notifications, you can report on this as well, can't you?
Exactly.
Would anyone like to take a quick, shall we show you how the service scheduler works? Because it feels like this is an awful lot of records, but actually creating them isn't, the system makes it a little easier for you. So.
Yeah, should we go through it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. So first things first, what I want to do, let's pretend like we're going to create a service schedule for one of our new services. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new service real quick. And this is going to be for human impact on local environments. 2022. I add that year just to make sure that it's clear in the future what year that service was delivered. The unit of measurement, this is also going to be hours because it's like a course. And we're going to keep the status as active in that full service deliveries as the service delivery. Don't need to worry about attendance. Save. So now we've created our service to be delivered. And I'm going to hop into my app launcher and search for the service schedules. From here is where you can create a new service schedule. And it brings you this lovely interface that walks you through the steps of scheduling these services. So the way we have it set up right now, we haven't automated the service schedule naming. So this is going to be a bit manual. So excuse me, I'm going to call this 2022 impact courses. And this is going to be for the red cohort. The service is actually going to be, let's add back Jody. And Karen Park. They've been providing these services. And now we get to define when the first course starts. Or this is going to be like the definition of your service session. So the first one, we want to make it about 1 hour per 4 hours long. We're going to set it from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And the first one, let's go retroactive. Let's start this in October. We're going to choose Saturday, the first Saturday. And because we chose the first Saturday of the month, if I go monthly for my frequency, I can say every 1 month on the first Saturday. If I change the date that this first session is, it will adjust dynamically kind of when that first event will happen. So I've said on the first Saturday, and the service schedule will end after 3 sessions. And this box right here is, if you didn't want to create the service sessions, you want to, but I think that's one of the best parts of this tool. I'm going to go next. And, I'm going to go back real quick. I actually think I may have skipped one part. Default service quantity right here. Let's skip that one. 4 hours. Next. That part's really important. Okay, and now is where I get to add my participants. I, by default, want to add everybody in the red cohort. So I've selected filter by cohort red, and I can just add all right here. And maybe, you got an email or somebody called you. Maybe it's a board member. He wants to come to each of these 3. You can just say new, find Gennaro, and enroll him and get him added to this service. So you can manually add folks if they're not part of a specific cohort. I'm going to go next. It's going to give us a preview of exactly what's going to happen. So we've got our service schedule name. It's going to be delivering 4 hours of services to our clients. And it's going to be creating these 3 service sessions, starting on October 1st and ending on December 3rd, each one being the first Saturday of the month.
And that summary is quite useful, isn't it? Because it's like the summary of the sessions, which I think was the second tab, because it means you could remove, if you needed to miss a Saturday, you could do that.
Yes.
It's fine. I'm sure everyone gets the idea, but it was I think it's quite useful that there's this point where you could pull out certain sessions.
Yeah,
if you're
exactly. Yeah. Right here, that one, the review service sessions. Yeah. Any questions on that tool? Go ahead and save. And it's going to use its brain power. And voila, we've got all of our service sessions created for us. Everyone from that red cohort. And, October's already passed. So we know maybe we've got the attendance roster from Jody, who was providing the service. And as the back-end person, I just go in and I track our attendance. Jeffrey wasn't in there. Corey is consistently absent, as we saw with my notifications here. Corey missed a lot. And maybe Leslie was only attending for 3 hours. You can also simply remove somebody from one of these sessions using this don't create button. With these 0-hour sessions, like we saw with Corey, a service delivery will be created for him for 0 service hours to track that unexcused absence. But maybe somebody withdrew at the last minute. So, Kellen, we don't want to track a service delivery of 0. We just want to take them out outright. Once you've marked all of your roster, you submit. It's going to process. And once that's done, we'll see the attendance populate, and we'll see in our related lists all of those service deliveries that have been created for each of those participants. You see right there that Jeffrey's absence created that $0 service delivery, or zero quantity. I'm used to working with opportunities.
I know. That's funny. That's slipped in.
All right. And
Hey,
yeah, I think, mhm,
I've got a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So if you take the person out,
mhm.
would you be able to report on the fact that you've, out of like the 20 people that you had, 3 dropped out? Or once you take them out of this attendance roster, you can't report on how many drops you have?
That's a good question. I think, once you remove this, if you remove somebody from this cohort, we can't do it once the service deliveries have been created. Maybe what I would do, how I would approach a report like that, maybe I would report on my program engagements specified by cohort. And then I would maybe add like, I don't know, maybe I'm making it too complicated, but then I would add maybe a cross filter of these specific service schedules or service deliveries. So it's like, I know out of my red cohort, these people did not participate in these services, these service schedules. Oh, and let's look at Gennaro now real quick. I wanted to show you on his program engagement. These are his service participant records now. So because he participated in these service schedules, he was part of those, it created those service participant records for him.
And are those tracked back on his program engagement as well? I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, that was.
so do you get like on the program engagement record, you could see that actually there were no participant records, or
Yeah.
that might be a way of figuring out who dropped out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could have roll-ups, and you could, if you were rolling up your service participant records onto your program engagements, do a report on cohort red, see how many have 3 or versus 2, something like that.
Or I suppose you could just keep them in and just show 0 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, do you have any sample reports that come out of PMM
I think
doing all this
Caroline has something to show us on that.
Oh,
front.
cool. Okay, I'm jumping ahead. Sorry.
No, it's
I think you're right on the money. Was there anything else about creating these service schedules, these programs and services we created? Or should we move on? All right.
I just,
Oh, yeah.
I think that when you start working with a new organization, looking at using PMM, mapping which pieces they're going to actually need, I guess I'm thinking it's not required to use all of the pieces, but figuring out what you might lose by not using a piece can be fairly complicated. I think people are struggling maybe with that a little bit as they try to get started with PMM.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daddy. It is, because it's like, I mean, even looking at it to start with, there's all this, as the service deliveries, there's the participants, there's the sessions. I mean, Ruby even asked about that, and it's like, do I need all of these? I think what we've found is that as we started, I mean, it's been useful to have this example of where it did have a very fixed schedule, because we were finding as we started to put the schedules together, so the system sort of just, suddenly we had sessions and we had participants and we had all these things. And it's like, oh, that's how it's all supposed to fit together. But I agree, if you're just looking at it, it's quite difficult to know, do I really need all of this? So
yeah, and I was going to say, if you're not taking advantage of, I think for most of our food bank deliveries, we weren't tracking who is delivering the service. And if you don't do that, then you can't report on maybe somebody you want to recognize as part of your staff or a volunteer. Jody here, because we tracked it on her service schedule, when creating that, we can see she provided, this many services to the clients. But if you didn't take advantage of that service provider lookup, you lose out on that data.
Yeah, and I was going to say too is, if you wind up using everything in the PMM, that's a lot of data entry. And that's a lot of, labor hours, obviously. The more of these things that you implement, then of course that means that somebody's got to put that data in, and it's got to be good data.
Yeah.
So the other consideration is, especially if you're working with smaller nonprofits that are resource tapped, how much of this data burden or data entry burden do we want to give that person? Or are they able to handle the data hog needs? I call it the data beast needs of the system,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, thinking back to, I think some of this, it is certainly much easier, as I say, thinking back to how I've had to do it in the past with an organization that was offering classes on a regular basis. I mean, it was quite a data beast, because we had, back in the day, we needed kind of flows to create the scheduled sessions, and then we needed to figure out who was attending each session, and the rosters were more complicated and that sort of thing. It's amazing actually how much, for a fairly minimal set of data entry, how much actually the system will kind of make the links for you and put the pieces together and things like that, particularly if you have quite a lot of participants. And I can see, I think for the organization that we're working with at the moment, because so much of what they're doing is being tracked in spreadsheets and Airtable and things like that, they are doing a lot of manual data entry. And I think because there are quite a lot of sessions, it's a sort of, was it a 6-week intensive course?
It's 6 weeks, sometimes
kind of Monday to
7.
Friday sessions that actually, although they're probably going to go, oh my God, this is a lot of stuff to set up. Actually, once they've got the sessions in place, that ability to just add everyone who's enrolled to each of those sessions feels like actually that's a data win.
Yeah, and then we have also, we haven't gotten to it yet, but we have talked about having a program kind of cloning tool that we've kind of, imagined, where we could take, okay, this is going to be our template for, a summer course, and we're going to use a flow and kind of replicate it, replace the dates with user input dates. And, it would be quite a big, flow to create, but worthwhile for that kind of the smaller nonprofit that can't handle recreating that every summer.
I wonder if you know anything about ongoing development support of the PMM tool. One thing that it surprises me that doesn't exist is like a PMM settings menu like we have in NPSP, customizable roll-ups for PMM, the ability to, specify the format of the naming convention like we have for opportunities, for example, or households. Do you feel like that's needed, missing, maybe going to come someday, or?
I think some of those things will come. It's interesting how they do add little bits to it each time. One of the things was added very recently was it something to do with the bulk service deliveries? I think there was another tool that was very recently added, just to make the whole data it easier to put some of the data in. They are getting better at also this sort of supporting kind of groups and households, which is obviously a response to questions and requests from people as they use this program. So yes, I'm reasonably optimistic that that things will change. And I think what's also interesting is some of the work that's been done in some of the sprints particularly to kind of try and tie this together with volunteers to get the program management module and volunteers for Salesforce working nicely together. And there's been a group that's worked in a couple of the Open Commons sprints to try and make those two programs really kind of sync up and behave well together. But yeah, a bit more naming and some some naming conventions. Yeah, would be a good one. I think everybody's still trying to work out how to do naming conventions without workflow rules. And now that you can't create new workflow rules.
No, and it is unfortunate when creating those service schedules that it requires the name, when everything else, a lot of, what we looked at was auto-generating those names for us. Yeah, so maybe we'll see some improvement there too.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess I'll stop sharing my screen and
Okay.
pass it over to you, Carol.
All right. And I just clicked around a couple of things and lost my Zoom buttons. Here we go. So there are, yes, there are a bunch of, there are various different reports. There's a whole folder of reports that should answer quite a lot of the questions. Some of them to do with enrollments, some of them to do with how much, whether the units, so how many hours of teaching in one of our examples, or how many pounds of food have been delivered. Looking at absences, particularly these kind of consecutive absences, with the idea of who might need some more support or need to be reached out to. Also, this one I think is quite interesting. This one I think would apply quite maybe to the sort of food bank example, where they haven't recently taken you up on any services. I'm intrigued why this one is here. I don't know, as I say, this is a demo org, but this appears to also be the sort of, I think this is the kind of recent services one, but seems to be in German, so there we go. And services delivered year to date, that's quite, I was looking at that a little while ago, because there are also some dashboards that there are some sort of sample dashboards put together for you, and also other ones that you can create. This one is quite interesting because our wildlife course is sort of really dominating, and everything else that we haven't really looked at is not quite as prominent. But I think, being able to report on what you're delivering, and this one I've grouped by program. So we have the courses here in the food bank and the job training, and then the different services within it. As I say, these look slightly skewed because of our examples. They're not great examples, but also there are some other things that are coming up here. Obviously our contacts have been quite good, but we could swap this to the one consecutive absence, or use this one. This is the people who weren't in the last class that we delivered, and this 102 I think must be because the cohort probably didn't get assigned to anything recently. We still have one cohort that we last saw in April, which is why this number is quite high. I think you could also, yeah, it's interesting because you could also report by that, by the service providers. It's quite useful. There's this demo org puts this really tempting thing in. I realized afterwards this is all being done by Tableau, so we shouldn't get too excited about this, but and I'm not quite sure why it suddenly decided to refresh. But yes, because this is they put this here to kind of tempt you. But some of these things would be a little harder to build in actually just in straightforward Salesforce reports, and some of them are dealing with things like the case plans that are part of the paid product here, but but it's kind of interesting that to sort of think about some ideas, and particularly I like some of this sort of resource planning, you know, how many clients does each staff member have, you know, how many program engagements are they managing, and if you have a sort of application process here, this is reporting your program engagements by stage. What else have we got? We must have some stuff with clients. Oh yeah, there's a nice little Tableau map for you there. But again, some of these things can be done also through Salesforce reporting. We were talking about this scenario, weren't we, of the idea of if you had somebody who was coming regularly to the food bank, how would you identify whether perhaps they needed some job training or they needed some financial counseling or something like that? And that's kind of an interesting, and we wondered whether you could measure it. You could kind of look at the food bank visits and see, are they enrolled in any of our other programs? And then maybe have some sort of notification or something that your front desk people see, so that it's like, okay, if Abigail comes in next time, why don't you ask her if she would be interested in having some financial counseling, for example, or some job training.
This is kind of a minor point, but if you scroll down on that dashboard, the program management homepage, I noticed that component that has a 6 in it, client records with missing, I think it's phone number. And I think by default, it comes with that it's going to be read from 0 up, which doesn't really make sense. You have a 6 there and it was green. I wonder if you fixed it.
I haven't touched that one, but I agree with you. I think 6 is it's like, no, 6 doesn't feel that good. It feels like green should be 0, shouldn't it?
That's what I thought, but I don't think it comes natively that way.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
And on that point, on a related point, there's the age-old debate in Salesforce, you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should, and it's so customizable. I was involved in a situation where someone had made the decision to rename one of these objects to something more familiar to the staff. And, you know, that makes sense in some ways, but in other ways it causes all kinds of problems. I wonder if you had opinions about that.
I agree with you. It's always very tricky, isn't it, when an organization is like, well, you must relabel it, because this is kind of how we think about it. I think, we always try where possible to, I think we would discourage that. I mean, we try to talk it through with the client and trying to figure out whether there's a better way to do it, because I think one of the problems is that as soon as their Salesforce instance becomes so customized, it becomes really difficult if they're kind of reaching out into like the Trailblazer community for some support, or they're asking somebody else, you know, another consultant comes in, or just somebody with some more experience who wants to help them, because you then have to do that whole sort of translation of labels. And also it can get terribly locked down. I was working with an organization recently that had locked down opportunities as enrollments, and changed the label and removed every other record type and all the things that I was kind of expecting to see for the NPSP. And then they came back and they said, oh, we want to track grants now. And, you know, so much of our effort was to try and unpick these opportunities that we're only working in one particular way for enrollments, and try and put everything back again. So that one is a bit extreme, but I think what do you decide to do with them, Dodie? Did you grant the wish, or did you try and talk them out of relabeling things?
Well, this had been done prior to my involvement, and I think we made an interim decision to let them keep the terminology. And in fact, I used Translation Workbench to make it even more consistent in the user interface, because it was appearing some places with the new name and some places with the old name. And I thought that might be very confusing to users. In the setup as an admin, it still shows up some places as one name and some places as the other name. And I don't think there's anything we can do about that. So yeah, I think if I had been there from the start, I would have discouraged it. I don't know if that would have worked, but given how far along they were, I figured that we've got a lot of other problems to deal with in that org. Let's not worry about, you know, a naming convention that they're well underway with.
Hey, Dodie, what is Translation Workbench? What is that? Is that a tool that you used?
That's a Salesforce native tool that helps you translate the Salesforce user interface, usually for other languages in other countries, but it can also be used just to change terminology, even in the same language in the user interface.
The place you'd need to use it is if you're changing things that are in a managed package. So if it's a standard tab or a standard object, you know, like cases or something, you can just do that in setup. You can rename it. But if it's something that is in the nonprofit success pack, or indeed in program management module, you'd find that you probably need the translation workbench, because yes, for example, if you see programs don't actually appear here, you need to, though some of the service ones might, I think those are slightly different though. So because those are part of a managed package, it doesn't work in the standard ways that you can rename them. So absolutely, you have to use this additional tool of the translation workbench to do your translations. And you're right, Dodie, it was originally developed so you could translate into foreign languages, but you can have alternative English.
I was just going to mention, we had a client recently who, you know, they're implementing NPSP, and they certainly aren't used to the Salesforce interface, and the default interface, you know, has the donations tab, has contacts, has accounts, and they started viewing each one of these tabs as kind of like a separate like department in the organization. So they saw the donations tab and they said, can you just rename that development? And we're like, no, we can't rename that development. But, you know, we started thinking, it's like, okay, we'll make sure to create new apps for each department, and we'll be sure to remove, you know, the donations tab from that department's app. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just like, okay, donations are called development now, or opportunities are called development now. And it's, yeah, it's kind of that fine line and really trying to figure out what the client is asking for or where they're getting hiccuped on.
But it's a great point, and thank you. And I think, yeah, I think, Dodie, that's why, I mean, particularly with this program management, like I said at the beginning, there is, and Salesforce.org get concerned about this as well, is trying to help people really understand what these object labels are and how best to map them. Probably as a way of kind of discouraging you from doing too much relabeling of them. But I think, yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've found hardest as well, is you look at this programs and services and service deliveries and you go, where, what does this all represent? But there is, if you can find it these days, because I agree that the searches are getting better. This is the documentation of the program management module. A lot of these links used to point to the old Powerbus hub. There does seem to be newer places that you can find these now, both in Salesforce Help and in documents to do with Salesforce.org. But there's plenty of documentation, and as I say, there is a whole sort of set of exercises here about how you might use their data model to put your programs together. There are also some good trailheads on the program management module. And if I go back to my slides, there are also now, if you don't know the NPSP how-to videos, the community created videos that live on YouTube, there are at least 2 about program management. There's an introduction to it, and there's an also how to install it and set it up. So those are also a great resource to watch and to look for.
Ruby narrates one of them, and I know that they're working on a few more to come. So we can keep an eye out for those in the coming months.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, which one are you narrating, Ruby?
Oh gosh, I forgot. It was such a while ago, and back then I didn't know squat diddly about PMM, so I was just reading and didn't know what the heck I was talking about. But now I can go back and I go, oh, okay, that's what I was talking about.
I've probably watched it and I didn't know. I'm gonna have to go back.
All right. Well, we're getting at the 11:08. Well, it's 11:08 my time. I'm not sure what time it is in your neck of the woods, but what questions do you have? Are there any other questions for Caroline and Reid, or anything basically in general about PMM?
Well, this isn't PMM, but I did want to mention that Carolyn is an MVP and used to run the .org office hours and has been such an important part of the Salesforce nonprofit community. And I didn't know if she might want to share just a little bit about that experience.
Yes, please.
Oh, all right. All right. Thank you for putting me on the spot, Dodie. It's interesting. Yes. I mean, this was, I ran a session. It was, they were on Friday mornings, or at least it was mornings Pacific time. We ran them on Fridays. It's interesting because the office hours thing actually started within salesforce.org and with the staff. And originally it was a bunch of developers, and people mostly asked development style questions. And then it was taken over by one of their success people. Mark Baseman used to run it for a while, and then it kind of came out into the community. I did it for 5 years. We had a great run of it. I know there are people who really miss it now. One of the things that was becoming increasingly hard, to be honest with you, Dodie, was the expectations from Salesforce.org. Although this was a community-run effort and had always been a community-run effort, and we said that it was a safe space, because it was successful. I used to get a lot of pressure from people like Lizzie Roberts and Anne Young to, can we run more sessions? Can we do this? Can we do that? And what was also happening was that people were sort of expecting that because somehow I was involved with Salesforce.org. And so I used to get a lot of questions in between sessions. I'm sure, unfortunately, it happens also to user group leaders, but somehow people feel that you're a sort of representative of the organization. And so you get a lot of asking of questions. And then one of the things that Salesforce.org wanted to do was they wanted to have 2 sessions. They wanted to have one that was staff of Salesforce.org answering questions, and another session that would be run by the community. And I felt at that point, because of everything that was being set up, it was time to take a step back and see how it would work. There is somebody in Chicago who's expressed an interest in starting up another sort of Ask Me Anything community session. I'm not quite sure where that's at the moment, but they do ones for Europe at the moment. There's an EMEA one that Lizzie Roberts organizes. I think the hope is that it will come back for North America. But I think what you also have to remember, there are a lot more resources now. I mean, when we started the office hours, there was no trailhead. There was only one sort of support staff person at SF. DO. There are a lot more there are a lot more places that people can go now. People keep asking, please watch this space. I know that there are going to be, you know, as things grow and develop and change, I think we may still find that there's a really good corner for us to have more community-like conversations. And if we went back to doing this again, I wouldn't go and ask salesforce.org for any help. We would do it as very much our own kind of community crowdsourced thing, and the conversations may come back at some point. And Gabrielle had an interesting question: automating custom objects to PMM ones to have the old systems run in parallel. Anything? Well, I suppose we mentioned about having applications running in parallel to PMM. Is it a little more complicated than that, Gabrielle? Do you have a sort of series of different things that you're doing?
Yes, there's multiple different objects that we're using before PMM that are kind of like PMM objects, but we're just doing them in a custom way.
Mm-hmm.
So
and
now that so now that PMM kind of automates their objects together, we're trying to move to that system while keeping our old system. Let's get complicated real easy.
I would have thought that reporting gets quite tricky, doesn't it, if you're doing it off different objects?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how we should keep some of the custom objects and use just some of the PMM objects. It's a little messy right now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's like with the example that we were talking about, that we decided that we'd like to keep the this application object because they've built so much stuff out and it doesn't really exist anywhere else. Like the program engagement doesn't have all the sort of the ratings and the answers to the questions and the things that these students are doing. So what we felt was that you'd keep the application object, but it probably means that their program engagement object is actually going to be the barest minimum. Like it'll be linking the contact and linking the program, and it'll have a status on it, and that's about it, because everything else that relates to the application will still live on the application. And so I wonder whether that's that sort of thing of almost using the PMM as just the kind of as a sort of placeholder or almost a sort of linking object to get information that's in your old stuff into your new stuff. But I would have thought that if the old custom objects kind of do exactly the same thing as PMM, trying to actually migrate those records and give yourself consistency for reporting, perhaps the better way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see.
Oh, it's all right. Dodie's doing a whole office hours thing. A fantasy of regular meetings for folks. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and that's one of the things that would be great about. It was very much a question and answer thing, and I feel like people often can get that information in other places now. So I think this idea of a slightly different kind of wider conversation, and perhaps more that it involves kind of strategy and ways that you approach Salesforce and sort of thinking about it would be interesting to do. And yeah. Okay, so yes, a bit more like perhaps more of a super user group, something like that.
That would be cool.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline and Reid, for coming on your Saturday and coming to share your wisdom about PMM. I certainly learned a lot, and wishing happy holidays to everyone. And I guess we'll see you all next year.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. Happy holidays to everybody. It's been nice to share the information with you because it helped us to figure out some things and learn some things too. So
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is that I will be posting the recording on our LinkedIn user group, so you can catch it there in case you want to review any of the cool stuff that they shared with us. And yeah, let your friends know that we meet here every fourth Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Ruby. Thanks, Caroline. Thank you, Reid.
Yeah, thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.